Hi folks, how's it going today? I'm out here in my garden. I got some planting going on today. I've got to plant my root crops. I'm going to be planting turnips, fodder beets, and parsnips, and I've got to do a little prep work while I'm out here. So come on along, I'll show you some really awesome tips and tricks that I've learned for growing amazing root crops and for planting them in early spring. Tips for growing big root crops. All of your root crops, your turnips, your potatoes, your beets, your sugar beets, the fodder beets, even the huge size things, and even things like your radishes, they all have a similar ratio of nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium that they need. They don't need much nitrogen at all, just a little bit, not much at all. What they need more of is your phosphorus. They need a fairly heavy dose of phosphorus for root production, which makes sense if you want a big fat root, but more than that, when you're dealing with crops that swell and that grow really big and fat, you tend to need more of your potassium. Potassium is really what's used up in the swelling phase and the bulking up phase, oh, got a splinter, of most crops. That's one of the big things that helps your tomato fruits to swell, is enough potassium to keep the cellular structure and the circulatory system strong enough to continue taking up and swelling. And it's the same with your potatoes, your turnips, your beets. You need a lot of potassium, and that's my tip number 2. Number 1 is fluffy soil. Number 2 is tons of potassium. You need a lot. Generally, 2-3 times as much potassium as you have nitrogen is kind of what you need. You need a lot more potassium. So fertilizing with things that are low in nitrogen, high in potassium, like your manures, old manures, composted manures, and any other well composted materials tend to be very low in nitrogen and higher in your potassium and phosphorus. So they are already better for a great amendment or fertilizer for these root crops. Last year, I grew a corn here, and the purpose of that corn was in my crop rotation because I don't want much nitrogen left here in the soil for this year. If there's too much nitrogen, my root crops and my beets are going to tend to grow up and tall, and they're going to want to bolt more than grow out fat and wide with nice thick foliage and big bulbing roots on the bottom. So I grew my corn here last year, and I left all the stubble from the corn. Now what that does is it helps the soil to loosen up as those roots, which are fairly well dispersed across the soil here, as those decompose into the ground, they cause little air pockets full of carbon material all across this soil, and that keeps everything loose and fluffy. And loose and fluffy is one of the huge tips that you need for big root crops. Loose and fluffy soil and high organic content. Now let me show you my process that I'm doing here to prepare and plant. Hi Henry. Henry's my rooster, one of my roosters. And that's Jeffrey, my other rooster. So first thing I gotta do is weed this area. We got the classic winter weed overgrowth coming here under the snow. I'm going to weed it up. That's easy. Now I'm going to do a little light raking just to kind of rake out some of the loose stubble and grass and whatnot. But I don't really want to rake out the soil itself, because that's valuable soil. Hi. Oh, you're getting aggressive, are you? Yeah. Bark, 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 bark. He thinks he's tough. I have hoed all the weeds out of this area here, and I'm just going to rake it kind of smooth in between these rows of stubble here, in between the corn rows. Kind of rake it smooth. Now that is inconsiderate. I just planted that row of beets and you're digging it out. Nope. Go. Alright, now I've got all my beets planted here, and I've got to fertilize things. Quite often I will fertilize with one of my favorite organic fertilizers for beet roots, which is one of the 2 I did a video about recently. You can go check that out. And the best organic fertilizers to use in your garden. But if I put those out today, my chickens are just going to come through and tear this place up and eat all the fertilizer pellets that I sprinkle out. So I'm going to do something a little different. I'm starting out with some potash. That is the mostly white ash left over from having a campfire or from in your wood stove. And it is quite high in potassium. So that's really, really awesome for these root crops. It is a good dose of potassium. Pine needles. These are half composted pine needles. And if you know anybody with a pine tree, maybe you can go rake pine needles up. Hey, I knew you guys would come around. Good thing I didn't put those fertilizer pellets down. Come on, shoo shoo. Thank you. If you can get pine needles from a friend or anyone with a pine tree around, you can probably come and rake them up under the tree. They're usually full of them. Pine needles are, especially the old ones, they're devoid of basically all nitrogen. They're basically just a little phosphorus, potassium, and some of the trace elements for your garden as well, which means overall they are fairly good for these root crops. It is also a great source of organic matter for the soil here. So it's going to help to condition the soil, add a little more organic matter. It's also going to help weight down the potash that I just sprinkled down, kind of help that not run off in the first light rain we get. And it's going to be a bit of a lightweight mulch. As this stuff grows up, that's my next tip, as these beets grow, I'm going to end up mulching them because I want even moisture. Even moisture, no dry spells. That's one of the big tricks for particularly like your beets, your above ground root crops, beets and turnips and rutabagas, those sorts of things. So, even moisture, high potassium, very high potassium, and fairly high phosphorus, low nitrogen. So you get your even moisture, you gotta have your high potassium. And not right now, we're filming. And, oh my goodness. So, even moisture, high potassium, low nitrogen, and fluffy soil. Those are the points for these root crops. Other than that, make sure you don't have much of a weed competition. These root crops do not like weed competition. If they get weed competition, especially early on, they will tend to grow up and have a tendency to want to grow up and tall and stemmy and bolt instead of having a nice fat thick root bulb towards the bottom for you to eat. So, now you know how to grow some really amazing beets. I hope that you enjoyed this video. Okay. Don't eat my seeds. I'm apparently going to have to go round up these chickens and put them back in their coop pretty soon because it looks like they're intent on digging up all my beet seeds. So don't forget to like this video. Look around for more good information. I'll catch you guys later, and I'll be putting out more videos next weekend. Thanks. Bye now.